this. Okay. First of all, thank you for making the time to either kind of like put ideas in the doc already, and also just to be part of the conversation. I thought that we could recap quickly the objectives of this meeting. I think one of the key things to move forward with any proposed solution would be to agree on the goals. We've got a bunch of goals defined already there, and there's some discussion around them. And I think for us to really, before we put something out to the broader company again to look at and kind of like comment on, I think it would be good for us to have a list of goals that we agree on and make sure that whatever proposal we put out kind of like meets those goals. So, and then the second objective is to push the conversation along around what might constitute an effective solution. So one of the things that I realize is we're unlikely, and it's not the aim to get to a solution in this call. This is just for us to move the conversation forward. We don't have to figure out the implementation details yet, and we certainly don't need to be in agreement yet. So I just wanted to put that up front because we have some differing opinions. We have people coming from different angles to approaching this. And I think today's call is all about kind of like agreeing the goals and pushing the conversation forward, getting everybody's perspective and making sure we have a better understanding of what we want to go forward. In terms of just structuring the conversation, I thought we can start by agreeing on the goals or reviewing them and having some thoughts around them. And then we can kind of like give each person an opportunity that either put down or propose a goal, an idea, to just verbalize it, and then we can open the table for discussion and feedback on those if we have some time left. Any objections to that? Right, if not, then let's move on to the goals. I think for the sake of that everybody, for the recording and so that everybody doesn't have to follow along in the doc, I'm going to share my screen. Can everybody see the document fine? Should I maybe increase the font size a bit?
Shrink the window, please, so it would be, because if you can shrink it a bit, yeah. Yeah, perfect.
Okay, so the first kind of like goal, first goal we have here is ensure that merge requests are reviewed by engineers that know most about the domain. Sean, if you don't mind, I'm just going to quickly, for the sake of time, read what you said here. And does this mean increasing quality? I think we should mention it explicitly if it does. My personal opinion is that the way I understood the original issue was that it very much relates to quality, and so I think it's fine if we call it out. One of the things specifically that I have been thinking about is also, it's like, what do we mean by a domain? Is it just functional? Is it technological? Is it business domains? Or is it all three? So that's something we can consider. And then Camille, you just put here to ensure that our code base is consistent or consistent in the given feature set, to ensure that introduced features are having good architecture like Dataflow, to ensure that introduced features are maintainable, can be contributed by others and not spaghetti. So I think in a nutshell, it does relate to quality. So overall, a statement of ensure that merge requests are reviewed by engineers that know most about the domain. Maybe we can, to ensure.
I mean, like, there were like two sentences going through the discussion. There was like domain and code base. Maybe we should focus on defining exactly what those mean, domain and code base, for different people, because right now it seems that like we look over code base, but now we kind of start to change completely the focus with this proposal on a domain. So maybe we could first discuss what are like the structural difference between understanding of the code base and domain.
Okay. So I think for me, and just thinking back to the original proposal I made, there was, the thought that I had is there was a split between the responsibilities of a code base maintainer, somebody that is focused around the kind of like architecture, the general architecture and structure of the code, our conventions, cleanliness, maintainability, dry, and like basic things. And I think somebody actually mentioned it, down a little bit down, something that almost like a static analysis tool would kind of like give you, those kind of like hygiene checks of code. The way I currently read our code review process guidelines is that it doesn't put the emphasis or the responsibility on maintainers to necessarily be experts in understanding of a particular solution. It's not their responsibility to ensure the solution is the best or so on. That is the author and some responsibility to make sure that is that. The way I saw the main maintainers was it's an individual with a deeper understanding of a specific domain, which could be a set of features in a specific related area of the app. It could be related to technology, like for instance, we've had an instance in Create where there's some merge requests that have GraphQL in it, but the reviewer didn't have GraphQL knowledge, so they couldn't take care of that. So it could be that, but it's also somebody that has deeper understanding of how the specific architecture of that domain works. For instance, CI/CD or Geo or whatever area of the app might have a specific kind of like focus on how the solution is architected, and it is the domain kind of like maintainers, the way I saw its responsibility of ensuring that the solution is the most effective in terms of meeting the objectives, as well as it's performant and secure. So the way I currently read the code review process is that maintainers are not expected to be domain experts. They are not required to have that in-depth knowledge, and it's not expected of them to review it with such a view. Now, I think maintainers currently do that and do take the responsibility of making sure that the MRs are of a good quality from not just from a code hygiene point of view, but also from a solution point of view. And I think that's where a lot of their effort goes in. So that's what I would put out as kind of like my initial kind of like view on it.
So because there's the name maintainers being used in these two contexts. There was from the code base, there's cleanness, convention, maintainability. From the domain, we have maintainability of the specific area. I guess it's more the open question right now. Which kind of maintainability you consider to be more important? Because there is different aspects of the maintainability. It's maintainability in terms of being able to contribute that by others, or having some consistent, I don't know, way of writing the code, or maintainability of ensuring that the architecture of the solution is kind of consistent with the existing architecture of the solution. I'm kind of seeing these two main areas. From one angle, we try to retain the consistent style. From the other angle, we want to maintain the consistency with the existing architecture of the solution that is being worked on, based on how it's already implemented. I'm gonna challenge a little, because there is a lot about structure of code, convention, cleanness. Our code is I would not say that it's very consistent. It's kind of semi-consistent. I would challenge that our code is consistent up to what static analysis finds. Everything else is kind of very subjective to whoever is maintaining, whoever is merging changes or reviewing changes. I'm kind of if I personally go to the code written by Geo team, or I go to code written by the import team, they are structurally significantly different, even though we use the same maybe best practices, the strong MOIs and things like that. But it's kind of it's like something basically that's kind of like enforced by the static analysis to provide this consistency.
Yeah, I would like to add that I don't really believe that consistency is a key here. And indeed, our code base is not very consistent. And it's probably way more important to have a coherent set of features and conceptual integrity ensured in some specific area than having a consistent code base. Like you said and wrote in the doc some time ago, GEO and CI/CD are completely different. So our architecture is not consistent between GEO and CI/CD, but the features themselves and area themselves should be, coherent.
I mean, like even the way how the code is written, like from the code style, it's not consistent either. So like we are not being able to have the shared maintainers, like the consistency of the code base, which is like it seems like the main goal of the current maintainers, at least from my perspective, how the current system works.
Yeah, and in my opinion, it does not really work very well, because if you take a look how people that are longer than a year in this company work each day, when I mean engineers, when they are working on features, those people who are in this company for longer than a couple of months actually tend to assign domain experts or people that know most about the area that they are working on, because they kind of believe, or at least that's what I believe, that this is the proper way of choosing a maintainer to ensure that the code that gets merged is actually not totally broken, for example, or can be better or can be improved by a maintainer that knows a lot about what I'm working on in a given moment.
So are you saying that at the moment, some of the engineers with a longer tenure are actually relying on the maintainers to check that their code is correct from a functional perspective?
From a design and architectural perspective.
Yes, I personally get like a lot of questions from the CI/CD space when I looking over architecture of the solution, but also like reviewing from the code perspective. So I personally do a lot of like kind of domain expert maintainer role for some of the people that kind of pick me, where some of them could be picked by some others.
Yeah, and I have the same experience.
I do agree with this idea, but I want to tell something more. Because, for instance, I usually get pinged when something involves uploads of any kind. So it usually works. If you have been in the company for long enough, you eventually understand who is expert in a certain area, and you understand that the danger bot are just suggestions. It's not that you have to go through that set of reviewers and maintainers. So you usually assign to the people that are more effective and that can give you guidance. This has two problems that I can see, is that with the actual grow rate, sometimes you have teams that are just overwhelmed by new people. And so maybe they don't know this. It's not really documented in the onboarding. They didn't know who to ask. And so they just rely on the danger bot information. The other one is that you just need one unreviewed merge request to break GitLab.com. And this is what happened. So this is the real problem. So no matter how many things you review, just needs one to break things down. So this is, how can we prevent this?
Yeah, and I would just like to say that I think that Kamil's proposal is very similar to mine, and it basically allows people to focus on smaller part of code base. And this way they can build their understanding of this area better, faster, and eventually can become better reviewers and maintainers in these areas. So I think it's not really feasible to continue with having code-based maintainers, because GitLab is really broad, and this project definitely grows faster than a human being can keep up learning. So this, like,
I mean like you did
So-
say this like a year ago as well, though. So like, what's the difference from a year ago, or like from May?
There is no difference, than just the scale is bigger right now. And yeah, I still believe that having code-based maintainers might not be really good for the product.
So,
So
sorry,
can I
Sean,
just ask
just to-
can I just ask one question? So Gregor, so when you say code-based maintainers, just remind me what your definition of the code-based maintainer is?
My definition of code base maintainer is that's an engineer who's expected to review merge requests from entire GitLab Rails, which means that this person gets merge requests assigned that might be completely out of the area of their expertise. Because, for example, we have some new team or new area, section, or group that are, the people working there are writing something new, and they are assigning a maintainer that not necessarily even knows what the group is working on, and not to
Okay,
mention that they don't know the code.
So in your mind, a code-based maintainer has to have the domain expertise of the area. At the moment, is expected to have the domain expertise of what they're reviewing.
Like, this is what's happening. I think that's what basically people are trying to do. They are trying to choose a maintainer in a way that the person they are going to choose should know something about the area that they are going to spend some time reviewing. But this is very difficult for new people, new teams. And right now, half a company has less than a year of experience. So that's kind of a problem, although I think that people are quite good in figuring out who they should ask for a review, because we have a bunch of tools, Git Blame and stuff like that. And
So
this is happening all the time.
So is that actually the challenge that we're trying to solve, is to try and make sure that the maintainer who is assigned the review actually knows what they're looking at?
That's what I believe is the challenge here.
Jean, would you agree with that? Or do you think it's a different challenge?
Well, the way I see it is that the current way we have maintainers is not scaling well. The application has become too big. The rate of change is too big. We're introducing new technologies. We've got different areas with different kind of like architectures. It's impossible for a single person to have up-to-date knowledge across all of that. Now, when you assign something to a maintainer and they don't have the knowledge of an area, they're either gonna like ping you back and say, hey, I'm not the ideal person to look at this. Maybe ask this person. Or they're going to try and set this stuff up locally. They're going to get it running. They're going to try and get their head into it. And if they go down that route, that takes a lot of time and effort, and because they're not familiar with it. Now, I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm just saying it's probably not the most efficient way of operating at our scale right now.
So
that's my personal view on that.
There is one interesting aspect out of that, because I would assume that maintainer very rarely gonna go and run the code by themselves. Very often they're gonna rely that person creating change or reviewer, maybe this is like the last resort, ensures that everything's about that code being merged is actually tested. Because like maintainer just doesn't have a time to do additional testing. So kind of having more domain expertise can, in some cases, if some aspects are untested, just because of the wisdom of working with that code base, can prevent from some of the issues from occurring because they work on some aspect of that feature before. I saw a few examples of the features being merged where they never got tested by anyone, even like engineer writing the feature. And I would say that the maintainer is the last person that should be testing the feature, but maintainer is the last person that clicks a merge. So from one angle, like we can like consistently say that please test your features, ensure, and kind of ask people actively for like ensuring that this feature got tested. But the other hand, it's kind of like the wisdom that you build, that you see that some aspects are just basically not working, or were kind of like were not like understood ahead of the time. So I think like the maintainer is like the gatekeeper really, and now like we kind of get maintainer to be like the last approval into the process. So I would then question like, if the maintainer is the last approval into the process, which kind of like is looking on something that is not really needed, I guess. Why we need even like maintainers, like why we don't allow people to merge their changes, why we make it them harder like to merge that. Because like maintainers are not really looking over architecture of the solution. They are not like discovering kind of quirks of the behavior that they may have known from their wisdom.
That's actually a very interesting thought experiment of what would happen if we just didn't have maintainers, if we just relied on the author plus the reviewer and making sure that the reviewer was in the correct domain. What would it look like then? I'm not saying that we should do that. It was just as a thought experiment.
You can do this. It's if you assign directly to a maintainer that is an expert in that area, he can merge it without an intermediate review. It happens sometimes.
So in those cases, what is different about it? It's just that we have the trust in the maintainer to push the merge?
I think that, well, if for you it's easy to understand who is the most knowledgeable person and also is a maintainer on that area, it saves you time as an author. As a company, you lose the opportunity for someone to get trained in the process because the reviewer is someone that is supposed to train and get trained. Because it should teach something. It may teach something to the author or just learn something from the author, but as well, this happened in the next step when the maintainer step in and review the process himself, because if it's merged, it means, yeah, you've done a good job. But if there are things that you didn't notice, this is a good point to, yeah, next time I should check also this, and that. And it's how you became an expert.
Yeah, code review is not just about quality, it's about collaboration and knowledge sharing. And one of the reasons I find this discussion quite difficult, and I've commented on the issue that like the way it's moved around is quite difficult, but I think one of the reasons it's moved around quite a lot is because we're kind of talking about different things. Like the initial issue that Kamil created was more focused on quality. There was an efficiency audit, which is more talking about, which John was part of, that's more talking about streamlining the process. And I think, you know, we're probably not at a global maximum of what the best review process is, but I think to get from here to whatever point we want to get to, we're going to have to go through a dip, either in quality or in efficiency. And I haven't yet found anybody willing to like say which of those we are okay with dropping, because I think we're coming at it from different angles. And I think in the long run, we could possibly improve both. But in the short run, we're almost certain to drop one of them. We might even drop both of them for a time. And I think that's the real thing that's holding us back from being able to make an iteration here.
That's a good point, Sean, but I believe that we can actually find a solution that is going to result in improved quality and efficiency of the code review cycle. Because
I said that. I just said I don't think we could do it immediately. I think the first step will lead to a drop in one or the other. Maybe
I actually believe that we can do that. I actually believe that we can do that. At least that my proposal, although it's definitely not perfect, I think it might improve both quality and efficiency, especially around training new maintainers and letting people to be more efficient in the code review. And I think that, yeah.
So I mean, like one of the sentiments that I hear sometimes from people from stopping them like being more efficient, I mean shipping more MRs, is like I have to go through different reviewer and different maintainer each time, and I each time have to describe them exactly what I am doing and why I am doing it like that. It's just kind of inefficient. Like if you have like 5 consecutive merge requests, it's usually easier like to work with the same pair of people, or like maybe 3 or 4 people that do understand exactly what you are doing. And now like even if the system like suggests in the danger to people to choose from, I sometimes find people that are assigning items to me because of our process where it pushes a lot of small MRs, and they find the process of like picking people at random just inefficient. So I find a lot of efficiency like working with the like smaller amount of people on the given part, There is like the challenge of like how to spread this knowledge better. But
Right.
maybe
So knowledge sharing, the knowledge sharing part of code review is kind of explicitly like one of those things that is a trade-off against efficiency, because the point of knowledge sharing is that someone is learning something that they didn't learn before. And if you just have things that go through people who both or everybody in the conversation already knows what's happening and already has that context, then obviously they will be quicker because they don't need to do that knowledge sharing. There is no need for that knowledge transfer.
But
So that's why I'm saying there's this tension. I can't. I'm finding it hard to express
And-
like
and
how
like,
strongly I'm skeptical that we can solve both of those in a way that initially improves both of those at the same time.
And I
Because we've been
kindly
talking about this for
disagree
9+ months, and I think we would be much better off just saying we are willing to take a hit on one of those, even if it's a small hit, and make a small iteration and actually get started on something, rather than shoot for the moon and not do anything.
Yeah, and I kindly
Before-
disagree with that.
Sorry, before we carry on, I just want to note we've reached the end of our meeting time. I'm happy to carry on. If you have to drop off the call, feel free to drop off. If you can stay on, I think it's worthwhile us discussing this, because I think we're touching on a very deep and important part of this whole conversation. And I don't want us to get to a point like 8 months ago that the conversation on the issue stopped and nobody took it further. Whether it's difficult to agree now or come up with the right answers, I think we should push through and get to something. I think fundamentally we all agree that there's benefit to be had by having domain expertise included in reviews. How we bring that forward, practically is, we might have some disagreement with, and yes, maybe it means we can't have our cake and eat it. We might need to give up efficiency, or we might need to give up quality or something, or maybe we can have it both. But I think what we shouldn't do is not push through, and we should come up with some sort of solution. And that is why I initially made one of the objectives to be iterative on this process. Now, we might talk about a full-blown solution, but what if we just then roll it out into small steps, or trial it in a smaller team, like Rachel and Sean alluded to as well. So let's carry on with the conversation. If you have to jump off, feel free to jump off. If you can stay, it'll be great.
Just one thing on that real quick. Obviously, I agree with my suggestion, but which was actually Rachel's suggestion. But also, I think something that makes it hard to iterate on this at the moment is that we use the same process for front end, back end, and database. But, Rachel asked in the doc if database is a domain. And I think a question that sort of follows on from that quite naturally is backend a domain? Because is database already a subset of backend that we have been successfully able to pull out into its own review process? And Rachel, I don't know if there still is, I think there was a period where there were specific geo maintainers.
Yeah, there was a specific where there were, a time period where there were specific maintainers. But all of the maintainers that currently exist on the Geo team are backend maintainers. They're not specific to Geo anymore. But what we have found is that Geo, being its own sort of separate entity inside of GitLab to a certain extent, we tend to override the bot suggestion for who should be the reviewer and who should be the maintainer. Often we ping very specific people to perform the reviews because they have the domain expertise. And what I was going to say to the comment about sharing, that the code reviews are designed to, upskill others and to share that knowledge around. I think there's also, it doesn't have to be that every single maintainer knows absolutely everything about the entire code base either. I think it's okay to only have 2 or maybe 3, perhaps even 4 experts on a specific area inside of the company. The idea is to limit the problem of one engineer leaving with all of that knowledge, taking it all with them. But I think trying to expect 20 or 25 people to have that knowledge is probably a bit excessive as well. And I think that we should be satisfied if we can get 3 or 4 maintainers per area to have that knowledge. The
Yeah,
other thing
I
was
agree
gonna
with
say
that.
to
I
Sean-
didn't want to go too strong on the knowledge sharing thing. The point
Sure.
I didn't want to make the point that like everybody should know everything. The point I wanted to make was that the exposure in general is useful for all parties involved, and
Okay.
you know,
But
that
like,
sort of
Well, I
Like-
think the
because
other
you
thing
might
that
not
makes
know
it-
that somebody knows something until you talk to them about it, right? Like if I ask, I don't know, Alessio to review an MR, I might not know that he knows a lot about how uploads work at the time, but I might find that out from talking to him. You know, and maybe it's actually fine in my MR anyway because I followed the COP suggestions, but he, you know, he can point out like a way it could be improved or something that that will be changing in future that I wouldn't know. Like, you know, I don't think we can ever perfectly map that, and I think that's why it's useful to have that aspect of it as well.
But even if it were imperfectly mapped, where people would be able to select a maintainer that might have the knowledge rather than only relying on the bot, I think that would be a suitable first iteration. And yes, I know that means that the knowledge is going to be like remain with the people who have the knowledge, but I'm sure we could work on that as a second iteration of as to how to expand people's areas of expertise.
That's very interesting discussion. I would like to go back to the problem of training people and sharing knowledge about the domain with people. And in my opinion, it is much easier to actually train people in a very narrow area. Like, for example, the best map of domains and features we currently have is section, stage, and group. And from my
department,
and
there's
Yeah,
also
neither
there's
Alessio nor I
infrastructure.
work on a stage.
yeah, perhaps. So and
just
for my
sorry, just to belabor that a little bit, like I did point this out to Camille again yesterday. Like of the current backend maintainers we have, 9 out of 23 aren't on a stage, which might be instructive in general. And you know, I think it's also a sort of limiting factor.
But like this is interesting because it's more like for the historical reasons. Like a lot of people that were previously working on the features, they move on to do other things. Now, when we try like more people, we're gonna have more people that are gonna be more like aligned with the section, department. They're gonna be less stageless. But is it really like the problem that like we have people that have much broader knowledge about how the stuff are working? It's actually significantly better that people kind of move around, diffuse, and they
You could almost say it's the benefit of knowledge sharing, I guess.
Yes, but like it's exactly like it's benefit of the knowledge sharing, and like now the other angle, like yes, like probably most of people work mostly on the features within their department, but I every sometimes see like people from different departments contributing to features in the different department or like using them. It still kind of makes you that you may need just people from other departments to review your changes. So kind of it's maybe slower process, but it's happening that like we are, because the code base is so like interconnected, you have to touch someone else's code and someone else's department code. And you may just need other reviewers as well. Especially you, so that you are like in the scalability team, you're effectively touching everything right now, I guess.
The other thing that I wanted to ask about.
Sorry, Rachel,
yeah.
can I maybe just ask that we ask George to finish his thought pattern there? Like he was on something and I was following that and I was interested to see where he was going.
Gregor, go.
Yeah, so yeah, I was talking about training new maintainers and how it might help to map maintainers on group, stage, section, department. And from my experience, when I was becoming a maintainer and then when I was training maintainers, it appears that it's much easier to actually review a bunch of merge requests from a single area that might not be large enough. So imagine that you are becoming a new maintainer and you want to learn more about GitLab to get this confidence that you can be a good maintainer and you stop being afraid of hitting the merge button. So imagine that you are reviewing 100 merge requests from entire GitLab, like something is from plan, something is from CI, other thing is serverless perhaps, something else is, you know, Sentry related feature. And compare these to reviewing 100 merge requests from a very narrow area like serverless or things related to Kubernetes. And in the end, you have very different confidence in your knowledge and how good of a maintainer you can be. And from my experience, it's also quite interesting that people who do not have this confidence in themselves are not really willing to become maintainers, and it can take years from them to go from a trainee maintainer to a full maintainer. And then I also remember when we actually formed a new serverless team. Now it's a system team and we have a bunch of new engineers there. And we started a new project, and it was a very small Golang based project called GitLab KTL. And we had to actually allow people to, you know, work in that project, create merge requests, build new features. And from my perspective, we needed much shorter time to allow people to build confidence. And we are going to have a bunch of maintainers of this particular small project there, because they could focus on trying to understand a smaller area than if I had to compare to learning something about, you know, entire GitLab. It's way more complex. So that's what I'm thinking about training new maintainers, and why having maintainers train first on a group level, then on a stage level, and then on a section level can actually allow them to become maintainers more quickly. I don't know if it makes sense, but yeah.
So are you actually proposing that people start their maintainer life at the group level, and then as they get more confidence and get more exposure to the section, they expand their knowledge that way and eventually to the department? And the longer that they're a maintainer, the more responsibility that they have because of the more confidence that they would have had through what they would have seen.
Yes, that's what I proposed. However, I understand that it's quite extreme way of changing the process. I think that Kamil's proposal is very similar. Instead, it, you know, does not introduce, you know, layers and group maintainers, section stage maintainers, section maintainers. Instead, we have, you know, a maintainer working with entire section, for example, and there are no levels. So my proposal is probably a little bit more extreme, but I think it's just easier to learn about smaller area than entire GitLab. And eventually having code-based maintainer right now that are expected to train themselves, or, you know, are going to be trained, it might be just easier to train those people when they are going to focus on smaller area rather than entire application. And it, you know, the bottom line is their confidence in themselves, and if they are willing to actually take a step at becoming a maintainer at, you know, some time.
I have a quick question, just probably for my own clarification. In all of the proposals there, there's no thought around removing the initial review before a maintainer, whether it's Codebase or domain, looks at it, right?
That's not required, but I don't think anybody is proposing that we remove that. Like, it's already not required, like I think as Alessia mentioned.
Yeah, it's officially not required, but it seems to be general practice. You know, an author assigns it to a reviewer, and then, you know, once the reviewer is reviewed and says they're happy, then it gets assigned to a maintainer. Are we then saying that that initial reviewer should be in the same group as the person that, like I'm thinking of Kamil's proposal, you know, where we have maintainers with specific domain interest or expertise, where we say then, I'm an author, I create a MR in the merge requests area, and I then assign that as a first review to somebody in my group or stage, and I say, okay, you know, please review it. The reason for that is because they probably have some understanding of that area, so they've got the necessary things set up. Like for instance, we had quite a few things. If you were reviewing something in the system group or the orchestration group, you might not have had Kubernetes set up and all that stuff. So that creates some efficiency there. Yes, it doesn't speak to the sharing of knowledge yet, but at least to Grzegorz' point about like having confidence earlier in a specific area, it speaks to that. So that speaks to that.
Group maintainers, because
yeah,
this way we are working with a team member, like someone
yes.
from the team, and you can also collaborate easier on Slack.
Okay, so we move from MR is created, it gets reviewed by somebody in the same group or stage, then it gets moved on to a maintainer. Now, preferably somebody with domain expertise in that area. If there isn't somebody, any other maintainer will do. Or if the maintainer with domain expertise isn't available or is at full capacity, any other maintainer will do. Is that kind of like, like in principle what you're saying, Camille?
So I'm kind of like now thinking about that proposal. I'm thinking that like, from my perspective, algorithm could be even simpler. Like there is like this legitimate concern about the silo effect. Maybe like reviewer and maintainer algorithm is basically the same. We just maybe ask everyone when it's like being taught to be maintainer, so becoming a reviewer, or maybe when someone becomes a maintainer to pick at least 2 departments that they are interested in. And like we would just assign, as we are like today with Dangerbot, assigning like on random reviewer and maintainer to the folks that are interested in the given department. So this would be like the only change to existing process, like make people, reviewer and maintainer, like to pick the areas that they are interested in, and they would be only assigned merge requests from that area. And my idea behind how we would know exactly from who to assign merge requests is like, Sean actually kind of rightfully mentioned in the past that it's like quite easy to know that database review is required because we modified database for there, but it's pretty much impossible to another like section. So I was thinking that like pretty much most of people work, they contribute to their own department. So we could pick the person, I mean department of the person in which the creator of the MR is, and on that.
Or based on the label, the group label on the MR, right? Like because
exactly, something like that. So because like I think like one of the thing confusing could be like that we have different process for becoming reviewer and different process to becoming maintainer. So maybe like completely aligning them. We just kind of expect people that are becoming trainees and people that are maintainers to pick at least 2 departments from which they would receive the MRs. And this is like the only change.
I would like to suggest a tweak to that, which is that we just pick a group or a section, which again, Rachel suggested like in May last year. So it's really not a new idea to try this on. Like, don't do it globally. Like, I think all of my biggest objections here come down to like, this is too big a change to make globally. And I think the easiest way of iterating is to apply it to a vertical slice, not a horizontal.
But we already had oh my god, English is difficult, sorry. We already had it, and the Geo team had Geo maintainers, and I wonder why we abandoned this and what are the conclusions. Like, was it better or was it worse? Because people on the Geo team probably have some opinion about that.
Well, I think that I don't think that it's been wholly abandoned because, like I said, we tend to assign ourselves, we tend to keep both the reviews and the maintainer level reviews inside of Geo. It's actually unusual for us to assign the maintainer review outside of Geo. So even while we aren't labeled, even while the maintainers inside of Geo aren't labeled as Geo maintainers, chances are if it's an MR that's a Geo MR, we merged it ourselves. So I think that we're already following this model to a certain extent because we keep this to ourselves, although I do know that some of the MRs do get reviewed.
Because you have the advantage of having a large proportion of maintainers on your team, right? That's the other thing that makes it work, which we would need to change if we were to do it on a different team.
Absolutely, and I think having more maintainers per team definitely resolves a whole lot of the problems that we're discussing here today. Down to efficiency, review, sharing of knowledge, a lot of the problems are resolved by simply having more maintainers per group. But I would suggest that we should pick another group and try to do the same thing, and one that probably doesn't have as many maintainers as Geo, just to see what that looks like in a different size. And perhaps it's group, or perhaps it is section, but I completely agree that rolling this out iteratively is the only way we're going to know if it's going to be successful as a whole company-wide thing.
I'd like to add quickly, I'd just like to add another couple of caveats to that. I really agree with Rachel that it should be a group with fewer maintainers. Also, Geo is quite a long tenured group, which is pretty unusual. And also, I don't think it should be a group in enablement, just because enablement by its nature is kind of collection of stuff that doesn't really fit anywhere else.
I completely agree with that, because I think anything that we figure out in enablement isn't going to correctly apply back into the development section. Department. Sorry, I'm not sure of the naming. So I think that it should be somewhere inside of development that is chosen to try this out.
I would like to add that something like this is also already happening since a couple of years in the CI/CD area. And if you take a look at the map of sections, groups, and stages, the CI/CD is actually quite large right now. And I think that me, Kamil, and a couple of other people actually review merge requests there and for a couple of years already. And I see this pattern that the more complex the merge request is, the more likely it is that Kamil is going to review it. So, yeah.
I might, because like there is like the concern about running that globally. I'm actually thinking that right now, like maybe the best way is like to not kind of change any of the process, but kind of refine how Danger selects people. Only that, like change exactly how the picking of the Danger is.
Because
like,
you don't have to change any communication. People can still override it if they want to, but Danger is just giving a smarter suggestion as to who might get through this faster.
Exactly, and like just change Danger like for 2 weeks. If it doesn't work, revert. But people can like still pick the people that they know the best if they find someone better.
I would suggest to change it for a whole milestone. Maybe not aligning with the milestone, but I think that 4 weeks of time would probably give a better like a better indicator, just because you've had a chance for Danger to really kick in properly and for the MR, like more MRs to be flowing through.
Because
maybe better a milestone, because the weeks changes during the milestone, so the results will be affected by the week.
So what I'm really proposing is like to not maybe changing any of the process, just propose some improvement and just change suggestion on the Danger. That's it.
I think Bob's just in the MR, just for the record.
What do we base that suggestion improvements on?
Yeah, so my idea is that as a maintainer, I would like to go to some kind of JSON file or YAML file and list all the labels that I would like to review merge requests with. For example, groups, system, verify CI, CD, and etc. And perhaps that could be useful. I don't know. That's just.
I think even if we do this Danger change, we should still try and scope it down. So like we say, we want to do a Danger change for CI/CD, or we want to do a Danger change for create, or we want to do a Danger change for defend, or whatever, right? Like we don't, again, try and keep that vertical slice small.
Why?
So that because then we can compare how it goes with everything else, and also then it's a smaller change. Like if it works well, we can roll it out. If we want to roll it back, it's easier to do. And you know, we don't have to map out everything. We just have to map out what's most closely related to defend that we would like people in defend to look at more, or what's most closely related in create that we would like people there.
But the thing is, we're not changing anything.
Yeah, but I think it's not so much about changing anything. It's about going through the process of mapping out the entire system and allocating maintainers to different areas is going to be quite a process. And I think what Sean is suggesting there is by making it a smaller, like a smaller subset of people that will be affected by it, means that we only have to go in and perhaps allocate a couple of people and a couple of sections to it rather than trying to create a whole system map in order to have a first iteration.
Yeah,
we
a
don't
key
have-
thing that PMs have told me at GitLab a lot is like, if you are not embarrassed by the first iteration of what you are doing, it is not small enough. So like it should be so small that you're like, this seems too small to be useful, but it's much better to err on that side than try and go too big.
Yeah, I second this idea because I think it's not really possible to map all the sections and groups and stages and maintainers. We tried doing that already in the past and we kind of failed because we had to ask every maintainer on the team.
And now we have more maintainers to ask.
Now we have more maintainers, and if we can start small, or we can actually ask maintainers about, whether they want to actually participate in this experiment or not. But I think that rolling this out for a stage, perhaps 1 or 2, is probably also a good idea.
I mean, it's still like very interesting question. Like, if maintainers would make a decision exactly how much of the overlap we would have, because you still want, I mean, probably 4, 5, 6, 7 maintainers per like given stage or whatever, the way how you split these people. So like there is still like there is more than 0, and there is significantly more than at least maybe even 3 people to have more much better spread of the workload, because you don't want to also overload just 2 people reviewing everything. That can be also the problem, which can impact the results.
My question is, what are we going to measure? What are we going to look at to say this was better or worse? If we only change who the maintainer is going to be, how are we going to know that it was better? How are we going to know? What are we looking at?
This is a good question to begin with, indeed, because there are kind of 2 directions in this discussion. Someone advocating 2 camps, one for the quality, the other one for, it looks like the speed of getting something merged. We never say this directly because we talk about efficiency, we talk about this kind of stuff, but it looks like that there's one direction, which is, I want to get things merged fast. And another one, which is, I don't want to break things when they get merged. So if
there's a third aspect to what you're talking about there, though, which is the sharing of knowledge. Because if you have a maintainer who knows everything about that domain, and the reviews are always going to that person, you will have both efficiency and quality because they know exactly what they're doing and exactly what every single line of code does and what you will break if you touch it. The difficulty is that you create the silo in that if that person leaves, you have a significant problem that the knowledge hasn't been shared. So I think that it's the 3 pieces together that make the conversation.
Because if you also choose reviewers from the same small area, then reviewer is going to review the merge request first, and then this reviewer is also going to get an email with the review of a domain maintainer. And if the reviewer actually reads the review of a domain maintainer, it can be a good knowledge sharing mechanism, in my opinion.
So then how about this? We're coming up to the hour and I unfortunately have to jump off. And this time it's me. What if we say that for a specific stage or group or whatever, we're going to look at reviewers from the same group and maintainers who either agree to take part in the experiment or who indicate that they have expertise in that area. And we just run that for a milestone and we see how it performs. We can look at the mean time to merge. There's some basic metrics we can look at, but we can also look at the amount of comments and back and forths and stuff like that. Like it might be a bit subjective.
Look at the group's retro, right? Like we can look at what people said in the retrospective, and we can look at incidents. Like hopefully there wouldn't be any production incidents, but we could look at those.
If we really need to have a metric, this is probably not the best metric, but the mean time to the first comment is probably something that may have some value, because I'm probably a bad maintainer, but if I...
It's the review response SLA.
Yeah, if I see the list of 10 merge requests that I have to review today, and I see merge requests that I know what are about, I'm more likely to choose the merge requests that I understand than those that are outside of my area of expertise. That's what I sometimes do. It's I understand that it's probably not, it does not make me a great maintainer, but sometimes I prioritize them this way because this way I can also review more in a day. So.
Okay, we have to wrap it up. I'll take an action to write up this kind of like loose proposal we have together. I'll put it in a document. I'll give you all an opportunity to review it. And then our kind of like target is to run a trial in 12.9 in a specific area that we can decide still on and say, and then we measure that. An agreement?
Yeah, that works for me. I think
okay.
I really appreciate all the work you're doing here. I know I have a lot of comments that are mostly negative on the whole thing for everybody in this call, but I do really appreciate that we're all trying to move this in the better direction. And thanks, Sean, for taking on such a fraught task. It's kind of a hospital pass if the sports analogy works for you.
Yeah, it does. I'm a big fan. Everybody have a good day. Chat soon.
Bye.